was originally drawn to connect the seat of power in Rome with the Temple of Venus in Jerusalem. In the Christian era, the tomb of St. Peter in the Vatican was strategically located to be a continuation in line with this ancient axis. It is no secret that Christian churches were often built atop places of ancient worship. In this way, pagan shrines were Christianized, and their power absorbed into the body of the church. See how the alignment goes directly over the arch of Septimus Severus? The line passes only a few feet away from the Umbilicus Urbis Romae, the navel stone from which all distances in the Roman Empire were measured. All roads that led to Rome symbolically arrived here. Following the alignment through the Forum, we see that it goes through the center of the Roman Colosseum, where among other pastimes, spectators enjoyed gladiatorial combat and watching Christians being fed to the lions. This shape in the center of the Colosseum bowl suggests the Vesica Piscis. Could this be a symbol of Venus? If so, what went on in the Colosseum somehow became the opposition of the love and beauty associated with Venus. The last stop on our alignment tour is the largest ancient Egyptian obelisk in the world, including all of those still standing in Egypt. The alignment from Jerusalem passes directly over the tip of this 230-ton symbol in front of the Lateran. As you may have guessed, obelisks are one of the keys to unlocking the ancient mysteries. This obelisk wasn't always in front of the Lateran. It originally came from the Temple of Karnak in Egypt, and was moved to Rome by Constantine the Great's son in the 4th century. The last of the Renaissance popes, Sixtus V, moved the obelisk from where it had been in the Circus Maximus to the Lateran, displacing the equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius, which, as you know, was moved to the Campidoglio. Now Sixtus V was a very singular pope. As is the custom when a pope dies, the new pope chooses a name for himself. I find it fascinating that Felice Paredi di Montalto chose a name referencing both 6 and 5 in Sixtus V. The fact is, Sixtus V redesigned much of Rome during his brief 5-year reign. He considered moving the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem to Rome, but the logistics proved to be too much. He did, however, succeed at moving 4 gigantic Egyptian obelisks within Rome, completing the Dome of St. Peter's, opening 6 streets, building 14 fountains, and much more. Roman emperors were the first to rate Egypt in antiquity for its obelisks. By repositioning these obelisks in Renaissance Rome, Sixtus V was motivated by something other than Catholicism. Researchers Jan Witcherink and Aaron Parlier reveal much of what Sixtus V was up to. The red line shows a pair of obelisks aligned to the summer solstice sunrise. The blue line shows another pair of obelisks aligned to the winter solstice sunrise. Sixtus V placed Egyptian obelisks in St. Peter's Square and in the Piazza del Popolo exactly as they are, to create the red astronomical alignment. He engaged in a bit of urban renewal by opening a straight street connecting the ancient Roman obelisks at the top of the Spanish Steps and in front of Santa Maria Maggiore to make the blue astronomical alignment visible. Balancing the masculine symbol of the obelisk, Sixtus V restored an ancient aqueduct and built fountains symbolizing the feminine to accompany most obelisks. 4 fountains mark the crossing of the blue and yellow lines connecting the Fontana dei Dioscuri and the Aqua Felice, all watery creations of Sixtus V. The green line connecting the Vatican obelisk with the 4 fountains marks equinoctial sunrise. Sixtus V's tomb in the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore was his final gesture, linking his tomb with the astronomical alignments he set up in Rome. Why was Sixtus V obsessed with astronomical symbolism? Perhaps because astronomy is another key to the ancient mysteries. In addition to the solar symbolism mentioned in the Washington, D.C. Part 2 episode, Bernini's redesign of St. Peter's Square has a deeper reading. Witcherink and Parlier claim the 2 fountains flanking the obelisk represent a liquid axis, symbolizing the galactic midplane of the Milky Way. The axis going through the basilica is the ecliptic, and the other four paths represent solstices and equinoxes. In other words, the galactic and Earth crosses coming together is an astronomical take on the underlying meaning of the solar octagram star. To top it all off, the Vatican obelisk is surmounted by a cross. The official story is that this massive pagan symbol was Christianized in the simplest of ways, by putting a little cross on top. Hancock and Bevall write in Talisman that an obelisk with a cross on top is actually the hieroglyph for Heliopolis, the city where this obelisk supposedly came from. On Christmas morning, this is the astronomical view from Vatican Square. Witcherink and Parlier have observed that the silver gate of birth is due east of the obelisk in St. Peter's Square on the birthday of the Savior. I notice that the galactic midplane leads right down to the Roman Pantheon. This is our cue to have a look at this ancient Roman marvel and explore its deeper meaning. Patrick Hunt, who teaches classical archaeology at Stanford University, calls the Pantheon the most impressive Roman monumental building in the world. I see it as a calendar in stone. Its rotunda is an engineering marvel, employing techniques such as reinforced concrete, not rediscovered until almost 2,000 years later. In this plan view, you can see the floor pattern in which stone from all over the empire was inlaid, a testament to Rome's imperial might. Its circle and square motif might symbolize the Earth-Moon system in the following way. Here a circle is inscribed within a square. The square has 27.3% more area than the circle. Comparing a circle and square with equal perimeters, the circle's diameter is 27.3% larger than the edge of the square. Okay, so what? Well, the moon happens to be 27.3% the size of Earth, which is another way of relating moon to Earth with the proportion 3:11. In addition, the moon's sidereal orbital period is 27.3 days. The words moon, month, and menstruation all share the same root because they all have roughly the same period. Human gestation lasts on average 273 days. Another spooky coincidence has to do with temperature. As you're probably aware, Celsius is defined by a 100-degree scale, marking the freezing and boiling points of water. Water becomes liquid 273 degrees Celsius above absolute zero. Here are these numbers again. It seems to me that this fact references Earth as a water planet. Why are these numbers the same? Science has no answer for this other than pure coincidence. In this sectional view, you can see that a sphere fits perfectly within the volume the Pantheon encloses. I think recognizing this as the celestial sphere is the key to the Pantheon's symbolism. The original Roman statuary fit into the 7 alcoves. The pantheon of pagan gods was replaced with Christian saints when the building was christened the Church of Santa Maria Rotunda in the year 609. Exchanging pagan gods for astrological symbols, we see an arrangement matching the Ptolemaic harmony of the spheres. To the modern eye, this sequence might seem arbitrary, but it actually ranks the planets in order of increasing apparent speed against the background of fixed stars as seen from Earth. Ptolemaic cosmology is therefore an Earth-centric approach to astronomy. Mark Booth writes in The Secret History of the World, Ptolemy's map of the spheres is conventionally presented as having been superseded by the ideas of Copernicus, Galileo, and so on, but in fact was and is an accurate map of the spiritual dimension of the cosmos, a dimension which seemed more real to the ancients than the material cosmos. Are you aware that the days of the week are named after the planets? With the exception of Saturn Day, Sun Day, and Moon Day, English speakers unfamiliar with Norse gods might have an easier time spotting this connection in French or Italian. Connecting the days of the week in order yields a 7-pointed star, somewhat distorted to accommodate squeezing it into the octagonal symmetry of the Pantheon. Looking up in the rotunda, you see the oculus, or central void in the dome. The oculus is the sole source of illumination in the interior, so it clearly symbolizes the sun. The 5 rising tiers of coffers might represent the 5 planets visible with the naked eye from Earth. The 28 divisions around the circumference is where things really get interesting. It is my contention that the 28 rays represent days. Consider a month of 4 7-day weeks lasting 28 days. 13 such months add up to 364 days. The extra day needed to round out a 365-day year is where we get the phrase, a year and a day. Richard Heath has traced this 13-month plus 1-day calendar to the matriarchal societies of the Bronze Age. The Egyptian Sothic year lasted exactly 365 days, without compensating for leap year as we do today. Sothis is the Greek name for Sirius, the star the Egyptians based their new year on. Any way that Father Time slices it, the 28-day division fits the Osiris story. The Temple of Isis on the island of Philae has bas-reliefs which tell the Osiris story. Here Osiris has 28 stalks of wheat emerging from his dead body. The 13 pieces that Isis later reassembled symbolize the 13-month calendar of 28-day months, and his missing phallus represents the extra day, rounding out the Sothic year. Many religious stories encrypt astronomical information in their core levels. Returning to Egypt for more wisdom, let's take a look at the Earth-Moon diagram that came from studying the Great Pyramid. Recall how the relative sizes of Moon and Earth fit the diagram when the circle was squared. John Michel rediscovered the key to much more ancient wisdom still encrypted in this diagram in his book The Dimensions of Paradise. Michel expanded the number of spheres in the diagram from 1 to 12 for reasons that will soon become apparent. If the mean diameter of the Moon is 2,160 miles, then the 12-moon evolution in the diagram encodes the Great Year. 2,160 times 12 equals 25,920, which is Earth's precessional period. Each month in this so-called Great Year resonates within. Remember the 7-rayed diadem of Isis and the 7 rays of the Statue of Liberty? I prefer to call this the Isis diagram, in reference to the older stream of knowledge coming out of Egypt. The Isis diagram encodes just intonation in music. On the most basic level, consider 1 octave of a piano keyboard. A total of 12 notes are divided by sharps, leaving 7 white keys. The term sharp suggests the pointy heptagram, doesn't it? As we'll soon see at Chartres Cathedral, music, along with astronomy, geometry, and number theory, are all keys to this ancient mystery. Expanding the Isis diagram to contain 4 7-pointed stars, we have what I call the Osiris diagram, which encodes the Sothic year of 365 days in the following way. The 28 tips of the stars represent days in the ancient month. 12 circles surround a 13th, located at the center of the stars. The circles represent months. 13 months of 28 days each defines the year. The Earth circle underlying the stars represents the extra day and completion of the Sothic year. And the Sothic year was itself calibrated by the heliacal rising of the star of Isis, consort to Osiris. It's beautiful the way the geometry matches the cosmology. The architecture of the universe is embedded in Egyptian cosmology. To perceive the larger ramifications of the cosmology we are rediscovering, let's break away from 2D diagrams and explore where we live, the third dimension. It's a 3D reality that 12 spheres fit perfectly around a central 13th, with all of them tangent to each other, while the 13 fit perfectly within an overarching sphere. I think this 3D reality is the source of the obsession with the number 13 that we've seen symbolized in so many places. Recall all the lucky 13s on the Great Seal of the United States. Lucky 13 might be more precisely described as 12 surrounding 1. In the Last Supper, Da Vinci depicts Jesus in the center, surrounded by 12 apostles. Geometrically speaking, connecting the centers of the 12 surrounding spheres with straight lines reveals what is called the cube-octahedron. The cube-octahedron has faces composed of squares and triangles, ad quadratum et ad.
How are you, Suat? The cube octahedron, interesting. I'm doing okay. Just kind of sitting around. I want to make a 12-sided spheroid thing. Ronald Reagan Ghost, how's it going? What's new and exciting? Radial array 6 around the X. There we go. Now let's move that up. I guess I'm gonna have to go right there. Like that. This one go right there. This one will go right there. Yeah. Dubs? Dupes? No. I don't. Do you? I guess that's right. Cuboctahedron. It's composed of square and triangle faces.
Triangulum, as they would say in the Middle Ages. As it turns out, cuboctahedral sphere packing has exactly 7 planes of symmetry. Do these numbers sound familiar?
12 around 1. 7 planes of symmetry emerge from 12 around 1.
12 around 1 with 7 planes of symmetry? The cuboctahedron is the 3D equivalent of the Isis diagram. The first ever known depiction of a cuboctahedron was drawn by Leonardo da Vinci. He created this illustration for Luca Pacioli's book, De Divina Proportione. Pacioli and da Vinci worked together, became close friends, and later shared a house together in Florence. Pacioli was at the center of the Renaissance Hermetic obsession, begun by Cosimo de' Medici in 1430 when he obtained the Corpus Hermetica, a body of work compiled in the first few centuries of the Common Era, recounting words passed down by Thoth through the last of the Egyptian priesthood in Alexandria. Here is Pacioli with a mysterious transparent cuboctahedron half filled with water. Some believe the younger man standing next to him is Albrecht Dürer. In Divine Proportion, Priya Hemingway writes, "In the autumn of 1506, Albrecht Dürer rode from Venice to Bologna to the home of Luca Pacioli in order to be initiated in the mysteries of a secret perspective." Clearly the cuboctahedron was important to these Renaissance masters immersed in Hermetic knowledge. Perhaps they knew something we don't. In the 20th century, Buckminster Fuller was obsessed with the cuboctahedron. He called it the Dymaxion, and built his philosophy around it, because the cuboctahedron is the only polyhedron completely in equilibrium. All 12...
The only polyhedron.
vectors emanating from its core have equal angles, and all of its internal and external edges have equal length.
Interesting.
In the 21st century, the cuboctahedron is the foundation for physicist Nassim Haramein's unified field theory that offers a new solution to Einstein's field equations. Haramein claims that the vacuum, a term used by physicists to refer to a volume of space that is completely devoid of matter, actually has a structure, and this structure is based at the core on the cuboctahedron. What we perceive as empty space is actually a seething cauldron of energy. Physicists calculate that the amount of energy in each and every cubic centimeter of space exceeds the energy output of all stars visible to the Hubble Space Telescope. The reason space seems empty is because all that energy is perfectly balanced in a state of equilibrium. It looks to us like nothing is there. Haramein has built his entire unified theory of physics on cuboctahedral geometry. I believe Haramein is really onto something. His latest paper, the Schwarzschild proton, received the Best Paper Award in a physics symposium in 2009. Modern physics seems to be catching up with ancient knowledge. To understand astronomy, one needs to have some background. Here's my crash course in esoteric astronomy in 6 quick lessons. The Earth revolves about the Sun in a plane called the ecliptic.
See, this is the bullshit I can't stand.
The 12 constellations of fixed stars that intersect the ecliptic are called the zodiac. All the stars of the zodiac are actually our close neighbors compared to the seasons.
I can't even watch this shit.
The seasons, the midplane, and the ecliptic. Its precessional cycle, the number of the sun, and the decad harmonize with the galactic line to end on winter solstice, December 21st, 2012. Acharya S. says, in the Christ conspiracy, many of the world's crucified godmen had their traditional birthdays on December 25th. This date is set because the ancients recognized that the sun makes an annual descent southward until after midnight of December 21st, the winter solstice, when it stops moving southerly for 3 days, and was born again after midnight of December 24th. Its precessional cycle, the number of the sun, and the decad harmonize with the galactic year. Before the Italian Renaissance, there was an earlier flowering of ancient knowledge in medieval France. This was initiated when 9 self-described poor knights of Christ returned from a decade of excavation work undertaken in the Temple Mount of Jerusalem. The most famous preacher of the age, Saint Bernard de Clairvaux, argued persuasively on their behalf at the Council of Troyes in 1129. This resulted in the Templar order being officially chartered and endorsed by the Catholic Church. The poor Templars instantly became a favored charity, and it certainly didn't hurt when the Pope signed an order saying they didn't have to pay any taxes, could pass freely through international borders, and were exempt from all legal authority save for his own. This also tells you something about just how powerful the papacy was in those days. The Templars accepted large donations and monetary deposits, started issuing letters of credit, opened banks in several countries, and essentially became the first multinational corporation. Very quickly the Templars had an abundance of gold and military power. To me the question is, what did those 9 poor knights find in Jerusalem that led to their meteoric rise in power? Could they have found Enoch's cube buried in the Temple Mount from before the Great Flood? Whatever the case, I believe they unearthed knowledge rather than gold. And with knowledge comes power. Speaking of someone with sacred knowledge, Saint Bernard de Clairvaux is a fascinating figure. Norman Cantor had this to say about Bernard in his book The Civilization of the Middle Ages. Bernard played the leading role in the development of the Virgin cult, which is one of the most important manifestations of the popular piety of the 12th century. In early medieval thought, the Virgin Mary had played a minor role, and it was only with the rise of emotional Christianity in the 11th century that she became the prime intercessor for humanity with the deity. Bernard wrote, "No one can enter heaven unless by Mary, as though through a door." In this illumination,
I begin to wonder if the Masons actually threw them off by instituting this astronomical unit of 93 million miles just to get those figures to match up, the 864 and the 216.
Bernard is shown receiving a stream of milk from the Virgin's breast. He wrote several works on the Queen of Heaven, which was also an epithet used in ancient Egypt for Isis. Essentially, Bernard reintroduced the cult of Isis to the West under the veil of Mary. As the primary architect of the Cistercian and Templar orders, Bernard's writings had a major impact on the Gothic building explosion that ensued all over Europe for the next 300 years. On building, Bernard wrote, "There must be no decoration, only proportion. As you've seen, proportion is what sacred geometry is all about." Although the current Cathedral of Our Lady of Chartres was begun a few decades after St. Bernard's death, Chartres had long before been a pilgrimage center dedicated to the Virgin. Since 876, the site housed the Sancta Commissa, a tunic said to have been worn by the Virgin Mary. When the old church at Chartres burned down, the relic was feared lost. When the Sancta Camisa was discovered unharmed in the ashes, it was deemed a miracle. The dramatic recovery of the relic catalyzed medieval Europe's interest in the building project, and Chartres ended up becoming the first cathedral dedicated to Notre Dame, and one of the finest examples of Gothic architecture in the world. More than a place of religious worship, Chartres was also a cathedral school in the medieval period. In this school, Platonic and Pythagorean thought passed through a Christian filter and resurfaced in the West after a 1,000-year hiatus. Chartres remembers Pythagoras in this sculpture in the right bay.
This guy, been talking to this guy on Skype last night. He actually calculated the inside distance of the sun and the moon and the concave earth, and he shows how it's literally impossible for the sun to be 93 million miles away. For the first model that I presented to you last night, where I drew solar angles to the outside convex, then plotted the same solar angles as tangents inward concave against the concave solar angles, where those points converge for each season is where the sun is at, roughly 2,750 miles away from sea level in the respective season and latitude concave. So this guy is saying that the sun is only 2,750 miles away, which is a lot closer than what they say it is. Second model, I used the circle to represent the earth. I overlaid the pyramid as I described, and also the drawing I sent. The king's chamber represents the sun, and the queen's chamber represents the moon. So again, you have a distance. Oh, okay. 2. For both models, you have an angular diameter for the sun and the moon. So that's basically how I calculated distance and diameter. And guess what? The ratios that I learned earlier with the attachment come out to be the same. Hence the deception. Wit to teat. Take a look at this thing here. He sent me this drawing. Where, oops, concave earth, Great Pyramid overlay. His name is Jason. And so within the earth here, he actually has north over here, and he put the pyramid on the 30-degree north latitude, which it is. It's actually 29.97 whatever. And so you have the king's chamber and the queen's chamber. The king's chamber is the sun. Queen's chamber is the moon. And so the shafts actually point southward from the king's chamber to this celestial south pole. Interesting. North shaft points to 60 degrees. Not sure why he calls it the celestial south. Yeah, they're built to be aligned perfectly with the inner pyramid. But as far as like the distance to the moon or distance to the sun, I'm not sure what he's saying it is. So he aligned the corners of the pyramid to the equator and 60 degrees north. So that also converges with the northern shaft of the King's Chamber. And so does the moon, for that respect. The northern shaft of the Queen's Chamber also goes right to 60 degrees. Boundary of sun's orbit, boundary of moon's orbit. Boundary of spherical heaven, phi ratio. So I think the top of this projected pyramid would be the boundary of heaven. However, in this diagram, I don't see how he says this sun is 2750 miles away. If the Earth were 8,000 miles away, it'd be closer. What it originates to now may no longer be applicable. That's interesting.
Of the royal portal tympanum. The 7 liberal arts comprise the curriculum taught in the School of Chartres. The 7 arts were split into 2 groups, the trivium and quadrivium. Trivium is where we get the word trivial, because grammar, rhetoric, and logic were considered basic but necessary skills to master, before studying the more challenging quadrivium subjects, which included number theory, music, geometry, and astronomy. Each one of the subjects in the quadrivium serves as a key to the ancient mysteries. The 7 medieval liberal arts were a bit different compared to a liberal arts degree today. These subjects were taught only to the elite. The so-called servile arts were taught to tradespeople employed by the elite. The goal of the servile arts was not to cultivate critical thinking, but to develop specific skills required by farmers, blacksmiths, carpenters, stonemasons, and so on. This liberal servile division mirrors the internal division between speculative masons, more commonly known as Freemasons, and the operative stonemasons who actually built the cathedral. Australian architect John James has discovered how the floor plan of the cathedral was laid out ad quadratum, as you can see from the red squares. The smaller squares are half the size of the larger, as octaves are related in music. The template for the cathedral ground plan clearly echoes the quadrivium. 2 millennia ago, famed Roman architect Vitruvius described in his 10 Books of Architecture that effective temples are based on the proportions of the human body. Vitruvius's written description of ideal human proportions later influenced many Renaissance artists, including Leonardo da Vinci and Cesare Cesariano. Here Cesariano's Vitruvian Man fits the cathedral's ground plan and shows that it was based on the proportions of the human body as laid out in antiquity. English professor of architecture Keith Critchlow has discovered a fascinating correlation between the floor plan and front elevation of Chartres. Intrigued by the fact that the rose windows containing the exquisite stained glass and the famed labyrinth have equal diameters, Critchlow compared the plan to the elevation. The rose window and the labyrinth line up perfectly, like so. The golden ball atop the sun tower aligns with the curve of the apse here. The moon tower's silver ball corresponds to the rond point, the center from which the chapels radiate. Clearly the design is correlated in 2 separate dimensions. Boaz and Jachin are the names of the 2 columns that stood at the entry to Solomon's temple, that are echoed in all Masonic temples today. Boaz stood on the left, and the name Boaz means sun. Jachin stood on the right and means moon. This symbolism matches the towers at Chartres. Critchlow explains that the sun tower is 365 English feet in height. The moon tower is slightly shorter, some 28 feet less. These measurements suggest several things. Number 1, the design was based on the English foot. Number 2, the 365-foot sun tower symbolizes the year. And number 3, the 28-foot difference in the moon tower symbolizes the 28-day month of 4 7-day weeks. I think this metrology shows how Chartres is a calendar in stone, very much like the Roman Pantheon. Before the Christian era, the grotto below Chartres was a druidic shrine of Isis. Above the crypt today there is a black Madonna and Child called Our Lady of the Pillar, that many suspect has a meaning older than Christianity. The Druid grotto housed a sacred dolmen that was identified with the womb of the earth.
What's the
Think
use
about
of
it. Both Isis and Mary were called Queen of Heaven, identified as so-called virgins who had unusual conceptions, and later had sons who symbolized the sun, who also shared the same birthday. The story of Mary and Jesus is a recapitulation of the ancient Egyptian story of Isis and Horus. The Black Madonna hints at her African origins while retaining just enough plausible deniability to avert uncomfortable questions for the Church. Chartres Cathedral's axis is oriented to the summer solstice sunrise, just like the red alignment Sixtus V set up in Vatican Square. The labyrinth is not a maze, because there is only one path to follow.
This looks familiar. I was in a chapel in San Francisco. They had this on the floor. It was like a maze you walk through.
Like the life we live from birth to death. The labyrinth's 11 concentric rings match the Ptolemaic cosmology, or spiritual dimension of the cosmos. Walking the labyrinth is therefore like taking the journey of the soul. There are 112 cogs on the outside of the labyrinth, a fact which has puzzled scholars. In them, John James has discovered an unexpected connection to the Arab world. John James writes, "The 8th century Arab Sufi alchemist Jabir ibn Hayyan divided the 4 elementary qualities of existence, earth, air, fire, and water, into 4 degrees with 7 subdivisions, giving a total of 112 classifications, which between them contained all the materials, liquids, and gases found in manifest creation. Known in the West as Geber, and considered to be the father of chemistry, he worked in the court of Caliph Harun al-Rashid, for whom he wrote the Book of Venus on the art of alchemy. His work paved the way for later Islamic and European alchemists, in their search for the philosopher's stone." Among his long list of achievements, Geber pioneered techniques in glassmaking that were used in the stained glass directly above the labyrinth that bears his philosophical number symbolism. Modern chemists still don't understand what gives the Chartres glass such incredible vibrancy. Sir Lawrence Gardner says, in The Bloodline of the Holy Grail, "One of the greatest mysteries of Gothic architecture is the stained glass used in the cathedral windows. The first appeared in the early 12th century, but disappeared just as suddenly 100 years later. Nothing like it has been seen before, and nothing like it has been seen since. Not only is the luminosity of Gothic glass greater than any other, but its light enhancement qualities are far more effective. Unlike the stained glass of other architectural schools, its interior effect is the same, whether the light outside is bright or dim. Even in twilight, this glass retains brilliance way beyond that of any other." Critchlow says, in the Chartres Cathedral A Sacred Geometry DVD, that he was approached by a Hindu gentleman who explained the meaning of the number symbolism on the western facade. In Hinduism, chakras are traditionally symbolized by lotus flowers with specific numbers of petals. Amazingly, specific details on the facade match this symbolism. The facade is a reminder that the cathedral houses the body of the church, or more importantly perhaps, Chartres is saying the body is a temple. Chartres is a masterwork of hidden syncretism, melding belief systems that secretly transcend Christian dogma. The tympanum above the central front doors of the royal portal encodes an entire cosmology. The 4 figures surrounding Christ depict a man, eagle, lion.
Crystallization of glass. Yeah, I guess so.
And bull. In Christianity, these are the 4 beasts of the apocalypse as described in the mystical visions of Ezekiel and St. John of Patmos. On the literal level, it's Jesus with a halo waving at us from inside of Vesica Pisces, surrounded by the 4 beasts of the apocalypse. A strange collection of Christian imagery, perhaps, but not uncommon. In time, the 4 beasts became synonymous with the 4 evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. However, when you understand the symbolism, a reading of the encoded message becomes possible. As you learned in my crash course in esoteric astronomy, these beasts are the fixed astrological signs symbolizing the galactic cross. Jan Witcherink says Christ's halo represents the Earth Cross. I see the Sun God welcoming you through the galactic stargate at the moment of your apotheosis. A royal portal indeed. I have uncovered sacred design templates underlying the principal section drawing cut through Chartres Cathedral. Stephen Skinner identified circles guiding the central vault and flying buttress designs in his book Sacred Geometry. His observations allowed me to take the geometric analysis a few steps further. I see 2 sets of 3 stacked rhombi guiding the wall design. Circles drawn from the tips of paired equilateral triangles define the centers of the buttresses intrados, or lower curves, and mark the spring line of the lower arch. This revolutionary design allowed the masonry to be lighter and the windows larger, admitting the flood of light characteristic of the Gothic style. Now you can appreciate how the walls at Chartres were designed ad triangulum. What is more, the diameter of these circles
This is kind of interesting. The Enneagram, 9-pointed polygon. The Enneagram.
In any case, the Navy base
Go back to the Enneagram.
the significance of this 40-degree angle immediately, because I'd just been hired by an architect to
40 degrees, 360 divided by 9.
perceive its symbolism. It is love, joy, peace.
Let's go back a little bit.
You've already heard about one heliopause of the ancient Temple of the Phoenix, which was described by Herodotus. I can't help but recall phoenix imagery in the Security Council chamber of the United Nations. It's amazing how many connections there are between the symbolism of the elite and ancient Egypt. You've already heard about one Heliopolitan obelisk next to the Met in New York City, and its pair on the Victoria Embankment in London. Rome has the remainder of the Heliopolitan obelisks left in the world. Heliopolis was the cult center for the 9 great Egyptian gods.
The 9 great Egyptian gods of Heliopolis. We got Osiris and Isis. At the bottom, Set, Nephthys, Geb, Nut, Shu, Telnut, and Atum. I thought it was interesting because my seal is 9-pointed, but I intentionally inverted my seal. I made it upside down. So let's do that. Turn it upside down. The I and the O match Isis and Osiris. Plus you got the Ouroboros serpent. So the regeneration of Osiris, the reincarnation. That's kind of interesting. I didn't plan it that way.
collectively called the Ennead. We'll learn more about the Ennead in San Francisco. In the first decade of the 20th century, G.I. Gurdjieff went on a mystical journey where he met with a number of remarkable men. At Mount Athos in Greece, he was supposedly entrusted with the key to decoding ancient Egyptian knowledge preserved by the Sufi Sarmong Brotherhood. The key he received is the Enneagram, and the means to decipher it. The Enneagram is the fundamental hieroglyph of a universal language. All knowledge can be included in the Enneagram, and with the help of the Enneagram, it can be interpreted.
It's also interesting that the main triangle spells out Zen, Z-E-N.
Gurdjieff's philosophy was popularized by his pupil Ouspensky, and through him the Enneagram found its way into modern psychology. The Enneagram of personality is a typology described by Riso and Hudson that's used in business, psychotherapy, arts, education, and for spiritual development. The Baha'i faith correspondingly uses a 9-pointed star as its symbol. Baha'i scripture specifies that every house of worship must feature a 9-sided great rune. There is even a Christian connection. In the 9th book of the New Testament, St. Paul wrote, "The fruit of the Holy Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law." Here is the traditional depiction of the fruits of the Holy Spirit, shown with first letters in Latin. It's another 9-pointed star. With these things in mind, let's explore the sacred geometry of San Francisco. Believe it or not, San Francisco is steeped in Egyptian symbolism. The original Michael H. de Young Museum, that was built in 1894, had an Egyptian theme, complete with an under-pyramid entrance that anticipated the recent addition to the Louvre. The museum was unfortunately destroyed in the 1906 earthquake, and the de Young Museum is presently in its 3rd incarnation. However, the 2 sphinxes that flank the original museum's entrance are still there. The Transamerica Pyramid is a landmark worldwide, and is the most famous building in the city. But the Transamerica Pyramid neither houses the headquarters of the Transamerica Corporation, nor is it really a pyramid. Does it remind you of an obelisk? It's clearly not a true obelisk, because it's not carved out of a single piece of granite, and the elevator core protrudes out of the sides of the structure. But we can see beyond this modern necessity to perceive its symbolism. The height of the 1972 structure is commonly cited at 853 feet, but this figure doesn't include the glass pyramidion cap and its mast. Adding the additional 11 feet brings the total up to 864 feet, making this the tallest obelisk in the world, far exceeding the Washington Monument's 555 feet. And 864 is a very interesting number indeed. As you learned at Stonehenge, the Sun's diameter happens to be 864,000 miles. In addition, there are exactly 86,400 seconds in a day. By making the Transamerica Pyramid 864 feet high, the architect was clearly making it a solar symbol. The glass pyramidion cap contains a brilliant light that shines forth on July 4th. In addition to it being U.S. Independence Day, July 4th is also aphelion, the day the Earth is farthest from the Sun in its yearly cycle.
Bullshit. Alright, let's go back. Forward.
The Son of God's birthday on December 12th. Even medieval liberal arts were a bit different compared to a liberal arts degree through Chartres Cathedral. Stephen Skinner identified circles guiding the entry of Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, used to the Bank of England. The bank was chartered in 1694 during the gesture Leeds. I need to ask, where does the royal axis go? It appears that the mall leads to the Admiralty Arch, but then the axis seems to fade away in the confusion of buildings along the Strand. Or does it? Tracing the axis beginning at Buckingham Palace, passing over the Victoria Memorial, travelling along the Mall, Going under the Admiralty Arch and through the buildings on the Strand, the axis arrives precisely at Temple Bar. Temple Bar was a gate designed by Sir Christopher Wren to ceremonially bar access to the City of London. It got the name Temple from being directly in front of the Templar compound. The temple was taken over by the Inns of Court after the Templars were ousted in 1307. The Middle Temple and Outer Temple are two of the Inns of Court to which all barristers in England must today belong. In fact, the phrase the bar, meaning the legal profession as a whole, can be traced back to Temple Bar. Wren's Gate is no longer there, but tradition and the law remain. Traditionally, the Lord Mayor would offer the sword of state to the Queen when she passed through the gate as a token of loyalty. It is a little-known legal fact that the monarch may not enter the City of London without the permission of the Lord Mayor of London. What's up with that? I always thought the Queen was the one in charge. You might be surprised to learn that the Lord Mayor is not the Mayor of London, nor is the City of London the same as Greater London. Confused? The law can do that. The person the Queen bows to is the Lord Mayor of London. He's the guy who runs the City of London Corporation, a tiny private jurisdiction that covers only about 1 square mile. The wealthiest square mile on earth, as it's often referred to, is the sovereign state within Greater London, whose boundary closely follows the ancient Roman walls of Londinium. In Isaac Newton's day, there were more than 200,000 souls living within the square mile, but now that figure is down to less than 10,000. Today the tiny city of London has become a leading center of global finance. Other powerful sovereign cities within cities that come to mind are of course the United Nations headquarters and Vatican City. Let's see if you can guess the final city in my world tour. Here we are over a semi-public urban park. I was drawn to this place when I read it had a small Egyptian pyramid folly, 9 gates, and a 5th-generation watchman who lives in the diminutive rotunda building right here. 5 generations of watchmen living in a tiny pavilion must be motivated to guard something pretty interesting. The informal layout and curving walkways say English Garden, but having been immersed in London, something bigger popped out at me. The shape of the park. It closely matches the ancient walls of the City of London. This park was built by the richest man in the country, who was also a king's cousin. He was a lover of all things English, an enemy of all things royalist. He ended up being beheaded like so many others of his time. Where are we? If you guessed Paris, you're correct. We entered the City of Light through the portal of Parc Monceau, established by Louis-Philippe II, Duc d'Orléans. As you may have guessed, the Duke of Orleans was a Freemason. He actually served as Grand Master of the governing body of French Freemasonry, the Grand Orient of France. The pyramid in Parc Monceau is trivial, however, compared to what the Louvre pyramid encodes. President François Mitterrand commissioned the Louvre pyramid and the adjacent pyramid in Versailles to be completed by 1989 for the celebration of the bicentennial of the French Revolution. Mitterrand personally selected architect I.M. Pei without hosting a design competition, as would be expected for such an important commission. The modern pyramid's metal armature was designed to support a lot of glass. Wikipedia states that the official brochure published during construction cited 666 as its number of panes, but then writes it off as an urban legend because in actual fact the pyramid contains a different number of panes. That didn't stop various journalists at the time from drumming up quite a controversy about the number of the beast, and Mitterrand was jokingly referred to as the Sun King for a while. However, I have indeed found 666 rhombi symbolized in the pyramid. Why rhombi, you ask? A rhombus can be made from 2 conjoined equilateral triangles. The rhombus is the masculine or linear element inside the feminine curves of the Vesica Piscis, whose name means vessel of the fish, because the Christian fish symbol emerges from it. The rhombus is therefore...
The rhombi is an octahedron. I mean, 2-dimensionally. Interesting.
sacred symbol. Notice how each of the larger rhombic frames contains 36 rhombic panes of glass.
What? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, there's 36 right there. So 1, 2, 3. How many got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5.5 going this way. Okay, anyway.
As you can see, the number of rhombic panes on a tip
153, that's the magic number, 153. That's the only number if you add up, like it's a triangular number. If you add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 gets 153. And it's the only number divisible by 9 that, how does it work? The only number divisible by 9 that is a triangular number like that.
typical face adds up to 153. This is a very interesting number that has mystical Christian significance. Do you remember the square root of 153 being equal to the number of moons in a year?
Square root of 153 equals the number of moons in a year.
We learned that fact by studying Stonehenge. Here's a quote from the New Testament that entangles fish and 153 in a Christian net. Simon Peter went up and drew the net to land full of great fishes, 153, and for all there were so many, yet was not the net broken. This number of fish, why bother enumerating them, has puzzled scholars for centuries, and is an example of how parables in the Bible encrypt important information in plain text.
That's to do with number 9, too. If you take a nine-sided polygon and you connect all the vertices, like in the center of my seal there's 9 sides. So you take each vertex and you connect every other corner, you get 153 divisions, 153 polygons, minus the central 9-pointed hole. So it becomes nested again. So in that sense, it's a net, too. No, 9-sided polygon, not octagon. Poly. Like Polly want a cracker.
Here's Jesus describing his practice of hiding information in symbols. He answered and said unto them, Because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. Therefore I speak to them in parables, because they seeing see not, and hearing they hear not, neither do they understand. Tabulating the additional triangles and converting them to rhombi, and then adding the number of rhombic frames, we get 166.5 symbolic rhombi in a typical face.
Wait a minute. 18 triangles equals 9 rhombi. True. 1, 2, 3, 4.5. 153 plus 9. What do you get? 18 triangles. Where are you getting that from? 303, 53. Back up a little bit.
To them, because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. Therefore I speak to them in parables, because they seeing see not, and hearing they hear not, neither do they understand. Tabulating the additional triangles and converting them to rhombi, and then adding the number of rhombic frames, we get 166.5 symbolic rhombi in a typical face, and 4 such faces equals 666.
Hold on a second.
Why bother
Where did he
enumerating
get
them? Has puzzled scholars for
18
centuries,
Rambai?
and is an example of how parables in the
Wasn't
Bible
paying
encrypt
attention.
important information in plain text. Here's Jesus describing his practice of hiding information in symbols. He answered and said unto them, Because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. Therefore I speak to them in parables, because they see not, and hearing they hear not, neither do they understand. Tabulating the additional triangles and converting them to rhombi, and then adding the number of rhombic frames, we get 166.5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, there's 18 triangles at the bottom there. That's where he got it, at the bottom. 18 triangles equals 9 rhombi. So you have 36, 36, 36 is 108 plus 45 is 115. 153. But then you also have 9. 153 plus 9 is 164. Then, and then he's got bigger rhombi. 65, 66. Wait a minute. 162, and then 63, 64, 65. 66.5. So, the rhombi total 100 they total 666. Pretty cool. Neato. 1, 2, 3, 6, 12, 13, 14, 15. That's neat. Okay, keep going.
5 symbolic rhombi in a typical face, and 4 such faces equals 666. Let's look at the actual Bible quote and see what it tells us in regard to the infamous number of the beast. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Why man is called a beast should be obvious by what humans are doing to this planet's natural environment.
It's not a planet.
We may be bestial in our unenlightened state, but this is beside the point I'm making. The beast here is not Satan, but man. In particular, the Louvre Pyramid is about a man. Robert Bauval had a stunning realization described in the book Talisman. He realized the historic core of Paris is correlated with the temples of Luxor and Karnak in Egypt. Luxor and Karnak are adjacent ancient temples. Bauval observed that the 6-degree angle between the axes of Luxor and Karnak matched the 6-degree bend in the Louvre. The Temple of Luxor is the one with the embedded 6-degree angle.
Ooh.
I went a step further and laid the Luxor ground plan over the Louvre and the Tuileries garden. The Tuileries was laid out by Le Notre at the request of Louis XIV. We see this direct correlation only when the temple plan is mirrored. Might the Sun King's intention have been for Paris to be the mirror of Luxor? Validation that the Temple of Luxor was used as a design template is the fact that the obelisk erected in the Place de la Concorde is from the very same Temple of Luxor. After the Revolution, the Luxor obelisk replaced the guillotine in what became known as the Place de la Concorde. In an outstanding act of engineering, the obelisk was erected by the aforementioned Duke of Orleans' son, who many years after the 1789 Revolution became the last king of France. The important thing to recognize here is that the French obsession with Hermetic symbolism passed through the Revolution completely unscathed. In the early 20th century, modern French alchemist Schwaller de Lubix lived in Luxor for 15 years. Out of his intensive study came the book The Temple of Man, wherein he showed how the Temple of Luxor represents the body of a man. Now we're really onto something. I see the head here, the neck, the heart, all the way to the small chambers of the intestines here. The obelisk is, of course, his erect phallus. The ancient Egyptians related the cult of the phallus with the dismemberment of Osiris. Next I overlaid the most famous depiction of the human body ever made, Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man.
The Vitruvian Man.
See how his leg follows the bend in the Seine? These roads follow the angle of his other leg, and the Luxembourg Gardens seem to parallel his arm.
You're stretching it.
Could the Vitruvian Man be another hidden template in the design of Paris? If so, I suspect the man of Paris is Osiris.
Yeah, Osiris.
Thinking on this, I started to see energy centers in the parterres of the Tuileries. At first I thought they were chakras, but their locations tell a slightly different story. In a normal state of consciousness, people don't see chakras. However, as we learned at Chartres, chakras are part of the architecture of the universe we've been investigating. If chakras exist on another level of reality, call it the etheric body or aura if you will, then their interface in our everyday reality is controlled by the endocrine system in the physical body. Why do we care? Because stimulating and balancing the endocrine system can lead to states of ecstasy, using more of the brain, slowing the aging process, attaining enlightenment, and even experiencing everlasting life, as some believe. I was able to pinpoint gland locations in Paris because of another observation. Many famous public spaces have axial streets pointing directly to where the ductless glands would be in the body
right
of
on
a
the
man.
nose.
The Church of the Madeleine and Palais Bourbon form a cross-axis directly in line with the obelisk in La Place de la Concorde. On one side we have Napoleon's church venerating Mary Magdalene, who is said to have...
You know what? Did you spam? Don't ever spam my wall like that, Anita. That was really bad. Just go away. Don't you understand? I do not want you here.
Started the royal bloodline of the Son of God. On the other side is the Palais Bourbon, containing the lower house of the Parliament of France, known as the National Assembly. These two Roman-styled temples energize the gonads in the body of Paris, on either side of his phallus centered on the axe historique. The gland most associated with enlightened states is of course the pineal, which actually looks like a tiny pine cone in the center of the human brain. This colossal pine cone is in the courtyard of the Belvedere in the Vatican, a name which recalls the affluent town of the same name overlooking San Francisco. The pine cone is flanked by two peacocks, which are ancient symbols of resurrection that predate Christianity. Believe it or not, there is an empty black coffin I couldn't get a picture of behind the colossal pine cone that symbolizes the death and rebirth of Osiris. The pine cone in the private courtyard is actually of 1st century bronze that used to act as a fountain in front of the Temple of Isis in ancient Rome. In the Renaissance, Sixtus V built the library wing that closed off the courtyard, perhaps in order to hide pagan symbols not easily explained by the Catholic Church. The pineal gland of Paris marks one endpoint of a line starting at the Paris Observatory, whose construction was incidentally authorized by Louis XIV. This axis passes directly through the French Senate and the Luxembourg Gardens. This cosmic connection to enlightenment is not lost on me. Also notable is the fact that nothing aligns with the thymus or throat chakra. As the throat is associated with speaking and communication, it seems appropriate nothing should energize this center if secrecy is to be maintained. Each of the other alignments is an interesting case study for further analysis. Parc Monceau is right under the Vitruvian Man's foot. His outstretched leg seems to point directly at the Rotunda building where the gatekeeper lives. The tiny rotunda was designed by architect Claude Nicolas Ledoux, an interesting figure to be sure. Ledoux built 63 toll barrier buildings in the city wall built around Paris in the Ancien Regime to collect taxes. This tax wall was universally hated and was torn down during the Revolution. When the Paris metro was built, it made sense to dig up the city where the extra space for the wall had been, so metro lines 2 and 6 follow the tax wall boundary. Only 3 of Ledoux's tax structures remain today, and the rotunda in Parc Monceau is one of them. I submit that it's no accident that precisely these Ledoux buildings were left intact. We already know about the rotunda, But what is the significance of these other two Ledoux buildings? They're all about solar alignment. The red line pointing to the Rotunda de la Villette in Place Stalingrad precisely marks the azimuth of summer solstice sunrise. Look at how this water channel continues the alignment. Some other examples of this alignment we've seen before are the line connecting the Vatican obelisk with the obelisk in Piazza del Popolo, and in the orientation of Chartres Cathedral. The green line pointing to the Barrière d'Enfer, or Gate of Hell, is oriented appropriately due south. It's called the Gate of Hell because Ledoux's pair of tax collection buildings are immediately adjacent to the entrance of the Paris catacombs.
Hey, Matthew.
This reminds me of the phrase, "Nothing is as sure as death and taxes." The yellow line points to the Trocadero in the azimuth of equinoctial sunset. Trocadero marks the beginning of the white axis, running through the Eiffel Tower and the École Militaire complex. The white line connects Trocadero to the Gate of Hell, but has no astronomical meaning as far as I can tell. The blue line starts at the obelisk at Place Fontenoy, which is right on the white axis in front of UNESCO. This non-Egyptian obelisk commemorates a battle that took place in the year 841, but the obelisk was erected here in 1860. The blue line is precisely the azimuth of winter solstice sunset. Maybe you're wondering where all the colored lines converge. Their common center is precisely at the entrance to the Tuileries garden. But why is it there? Before the Revolution, the Tuileries was a royal palace that closed off the Louvre courtyard. The center point of the solar alignments lies directly in front of the entrance to the royal palace. The palace was destroyed in the chaos of the Revolution, but the alignments remain. Just like the Great Pyramid of Giza, the Louvre Pyramid will yield more secrets upon further analysis. The plan of the Louvre Pyramid and the fountain surrounding it is itself a sacred diagram. Referred to as the sacred cut of Ad Quadratum, the diagram was traditionally used as an astrological house chart in centuries past. Overlaid is the house chart Johannes Kepler made for General Wallenstein in 1608. Yes, that's the same Kepler who discovered the 3 laws of planetary motion that keep telecommunication satellites in orbit today.
No.
Astrology is actually very serious business. The Louvre Pyramid acts as entrance to the world's most visited museum. Recall how I overlaid the Vitruvian Man only after analyzing the pyramid itself and finding the mark of the beast encoded within. The Vitruvian Man's mouth corresponds appropriately with this entrance, so the next time you enter the Louvre, ponder its symbolism. You are entering the mouth of the beast.
Yay.
Look at what is aligned with this so-called mouth, the Palais Royal. Central to French history, the Palais Royal is where many generations of royals lived. Louis XIV grew up there, for example. The Duke of Orleans later owned the palace. I was extremely surprised to recognize the 5x12 Jerusalem rectangle precisely framed in the proportions of the royal palace's court of honor. The palace garden's 2 famous lawns symbolize the 2 holiest spots in Christianity and Judaism. There is clearly a royal French connection to the ancient mysteries. Royal of royals, Louis XIV's reign of 72 years was longer and arguably more powerful than any other king in European history. Architect of the Vatican's St. Peter's Square, Gian Lorenzo Bernini allegorically portrayed Louis XIV as Alexander the Great in the famous equestrian statue located in front of the Louvre Pyramid. This statue marks the beginning and faces in the direction of what is called the Axe Historique of Paris. The historical axis runs from the equestrian statue of Louis XIV, under Napoleon's Arc de Triomphe du Carrousel, through the Tuileries, over the Luxor obelisk, under the Arc de Triomphe, all the way along the Champs-Élysées to its endpoint within the Grand Arch in La Défense. French Egyptologist Jean-Marcel Humbert had this to say about the Axe Historique. I have not verified this, but it is said that the great axis is a Masonic alignment, and that this is not the result of chance. It is known that the Freemasons find their origins in ancient Egypt. I have verified that the axe historique is indeed aligned to the heliacal rising of Sirius, just as is the older Notre Dame on the Ile de la Cité, whose axis parallels the Champs-Élysées. Hancock and Beval trace the origins of this alignment to the fact that Notre Dame was likely built over an ancient Roman temple of Isis. Notre Dame, or Our Lady, is therefore Mary veiling Isis. Perhaps even more amazing, Hancock and Beval show the word Paris comes from the melding together of the words Pharia Isis. Pharia, or Pharos in Greek, is the island where the wondrous lighthouse of Alexandria was, and the center of Isis worship in antiquity. Now let's imagine taking an enlightening ride with the Sun King along the axis he laid out, which was greatly embellished with hidden symbolism by Napoleon, Mitterrand, and many others on up to the present day. For the first destination, we must travel underground, both under the Earth's surface and below public consciousness. La Pyramide Inversée is an underground atrium space surrounded by fashionable boutiques. The downward-facing pyramid is the symbolic opposite to the famous museum entrance. As the upward-pointing pyramid symbolizes a man, the inverted pyramid must therefore represent a woman. In alchemy, the symbols for fire and water are upward and downward-facing triangles. This polarity is also represented in Western mysticism as sword and chalice. The chalice in question is, of course, the Holy Grail. Going with the Holy Blood, Holy Grail thesis, it's fitting that Dan Brown chose to portray the location of the tomb of Mary Magdalene right here, under the Pyramide Inversée, at the end of the Da Vinci Code. If the Star of David is the symbol of the union of male and female, then the star tetrahedron is its 3D equivalent. Drunvalo Melchizedek's volumes on the ancient secret of the flower of life show the human energy field, or Merkaba as it's known, takes the form of a star tetrahedron, male and female being inversions of each other. On a higher level, Richard Hoagland has shown how star tetrahedron geometry is implicated in hyperdimensional energy outflows coming from planetary cores in our solar system. When a star tetrahedron is inscribed within a sphere, its points touch the sphere's surface at 19.5 degrees north and south latitude. On Earth, one of the tetrahedral points is on the Mauna Loa volcano in Hawaii, which is actually the largest mountain on Earth if measured from the seafloor. Similar energy outflows occur at 19.5 degrees north or south on Mars' Olympus Mons, which is the largest mountain in the solar system, in Jupiter's Great Red Spot, and Neptune's Great Dark Spot. Explaining these outflows requires a four-dimensional model of physics, where energy is gated from the Sun to the planetary cores through hyperspace. Energy transduced by each planetary body appears to us as heat in 3D, emerging from the most stable of all three-dimensional forms, the star tetrahedron. The simplest way of describing a physics that's based on the same geometry for both planetary and human energy fields would be, as above, so below.
Why don't you understand that there's a heaven above us? A literal heaven. There's a literal ocean above, as above, so below. Waters above, waters below. Why don't you understand that? You don't understand that the earth is concave, that's why.